Week 4 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire this week. The first quarterback, Matthew Stafford of the Los Angeles Rams. Anytime you got two great receivers, obviously, like Puka Nacua, Devontae Adams, it's going to make your job easier. And so far in the early going, I thought Stafford's been serviceable. Week 1 versus Houston, 245 pass yards, a touchdown. Week 2 with Tennessee, 298 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception. And Week 3 in a tough matchup and a tough loss where they blew the game at Philadelphia, 196 pass yards, 2 touchdowns and interceptions. So now the schedule gets a little bit easier. Indianapolis in Week 4, where their defense is middle of the pack, but they give up a lot of yards and points for the most part. And then Week 5 versus San Francisco, where their defense is middle of the pack as well. So like I said, anytime you got wide receivers like Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams, it's going to make your job easier. Matthew Stafford, he's out there in tons of fantasy leagues right now in 69%. And we know he's a quarterback year after year that goes out there and he puts up numbers and he makes plays. So far, off to a decent start. Not eye-popping numbers, but he's scoring anywhere from 18 to 20 points per game per week. He's Matthew Stafford, and definitely a quarterback I would add off the wire this week. Next quarterback, Geno Smith, the Las Vegas Raiders. Geno Smith in Week 2, he had a horrible game versus the Los Angeles Chargers. And then Geno Smith, he went out there even in garbage time and had a big ball game at the Commanders in Week 3. So Geno, 2 out of 3 games, he's been productive for fantasy football purposes. Week 1 at the Pats, 362 pass yards, a touchdown, 10 rush yards, and interception. Week 2 versus the Chargers, like I said, a bad game, 180 pass yards, 3 interceptions, 20 rush yards. And then Week 3 at the Commanders, 289 passing, 3 touchdowns in that one, 5 rush yards and a 2-point conversion. So Week 4, good matchup coming up here versus the Bears. Their defense hasn't been good. I know they had a decent outing last week versus the Dallas Cowboys, where they only held that offense down to 14 points. But Geno Smith, he's got decent options in that offense. Obviously, Brock Bowers, even though his numbers haven't been great so far to his standards in the early going. Trey Tucker, who's been a breakout receiver, 3 touchdowns in Week 3's ball game, and Jacoby Myers, who's a solid wideout as well. So with all those factors, I think Geno Smith in a good matchup versus the Bears could be a good option, and he's back home as well in Week 4's ball game, and he's available right now in 72% of fantasy league. Next quarterback, Tua of the Miami Dolphins. So far hasn't been great for Tua this season. He's a streaming option to me in Week 4. I know the Dolphins 0-3 on the year, but Week 4, good matchup versus the New York Jets, where their defense can't stop anyone. And this Miami Dolphin offense, they still have good options, obviously. Devon Achane out of the backfield, one of the better receiving backs in the league. Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, who's got 2 touchdowns in the last 2 games. So they got some guys on this offense. Is this Dolphin team, and we know they're a better home team than they've been on the road in terms of putting up fantasy numbers, especially Tua throughout his career. So Week 2 versus New England, 315 passing, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. In Week 3 of Buffalo, in a game that was close for the most part, he had 146 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, an interception in that one on Thursday night, and 10 rush yards. So Tua, obviously, he knows this Mike McDaniel offense. Like I said, they got good options. Tyreek Hill, Waddle, Achane out of the backfield. And right now, if you need a streaming option in fantasy leagues, he's out there in tons of leagues in 78%. Next quarterback, Sam Darnold of the Seattle Seahawks. Sam Darnold last year, he had a good year in his only year with Minnesota. He obviously got rewarded with a $100 million deal from the Seattle Seahawks team. Him and JSN, Jackson Smith and the Jigba, they're locked in. They got Cooper Kupp as well, even though he's been up and down so far in the early part of the season. But the last 2 weeks for Sam Darnold, he's went out there and put up numbers. Week 2 with Pittsburgh, 295 passing, 2 touchdowns, 2 INTs. Week 3 versus New Orleans, defense did a lot of damage, but he had a solid game, 218 passing, 2 touchdowns. The Week 4 matchup at division rival Arizona Cardinals in the NFC West. Cardinals, their defense is middle of the pack. Sam Darnold, we know he's a gunslinger. We saw it last season when he takes a lot of shots down the field and tries to make big plays. And it obviously paid off last year with Jefferson in this Viking team. And so far this year, I thought he's been solid in 2 out of the 3 games. So this week with a decent matchup at Arizona, and he's been putting up consistent numbers the last 2 weeks. I think he's a decent ad, available in 81% of fantasy leagues. And the final quarterback's Carson Wentz of the Minnesota Vikings. Obviously, this is a loaded offense. Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, who found the end zone in the Week 3 victory versus Cincinnati Bengals. You're going to get Jordan Addison back as well in this offense this week here after he had a 3-game suspension. Is this Minnesota Viking team, and Wentz, he's a quarterback that stretches the field and he tries to make big plays. And in his first start, I thought he looked decent, even though that game was over early and often. 173 pass yards, 2 touchdowns, and 4 rush yards. So Carson Wentz, we know, has bounced around the league. Now he's been on 6 teams in his NFL career. Week 4 game is listed at Pittsburgh, but it's a game in Dublin, which is a neutral site. So Carson Wentz, we know he's a gunslinger. I know it's not a great matchup with a defense of T.J. Watt, Cam Hayward, Darius Slay, Jalen Ramsey, but Carson Wentz, I think he could go out there in deeper leagues and help fantasy owners in those 2 quarterback super flex leagues. He's available in 95% of fantasy leagues. That's a few quarterbacks I looked at off the wire for week 4 of the fantasy football season.